Ah.
And rolling!
Is it actually rolling? Good morning, HFC kids. We are so ready for another week learning about how Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob and then Joseph, and now we're fast forwarding hundreds of years and talking about how God is still faithful to his people. We finished the book of Genesis and we're starting in the book of Exodus, which is the second book in the Bible. And it says that in verse 8, in chapter 1, verse 8, it said there was a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And it had been so long that people had forgotten all the amazing things that Joseph had done for the kingdom of Egypt. But now that he wasn't there anymore, the new king was like, now we have all these people here that aren't Egyptian people, so I don't super care about them. And we don't want them to take over because this isn't their space. And in Exodus chapter 1, verses 13 and 14 say, they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and they made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. And in all their work, they ruthlessly made them as slaves. So ruthlessly means with no mercy, just angry and frustrated, and it's you are our slaves and we're going to treat you poorly and it's going to be awful and we're going to make your lives miserable. And that's how the Egyptian people started picking on the Israelite people after Joseph had died. It says in verse 14 that they worked with mortar and brick and all kinds of work in the field. So I thought, what can we do together this morning from your homes and that I can do here that helps introduce and start out our story? So I thought maybe we could build our own pyramids. So here is our pyramid. I made it with some spaghetti noodles, and some of them I used whole spaghetti noodles, and some of them I broke the ends off of them in order to get it to work, because spaghetti noodles break super easily. So I started out with a base and then I built up, but you can build whatever you want with your spaghetti noodles. You could make a pyramid like I did, or you could build something else. But remember, when the Israelites would have been building, they would have been outside in the super hot sun. They probably would have been whipped with whips if they weren't working fast enough or hard enough, or if they weren't strong enough, or if they were talking when they weren't supposed to. It was super strict. The people were really mean. And the Egyptian just began to hate the Israelite people. And now it's been 400 years, and the Pharaoh said in chapter 1, verse 22, it says, Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Because if there aren't any boys, then they can't keep multiplying. So anytime a son was born, the Pharaoh commanded that the son be killed, that he be thrown into the Nile, into the river. And the mothers, their hearts were broken. The families were all sad. Imagine if you have a little baby brother, if he had to be killed because the Pharaoh hated you and your people. And the Israelites started to think, we're stuck. What are we supposed to do? God brought us here and he was blessing Joseph, but now God must have forgotten about us because we're stuck building pyramids and we can't have baby sons. And if we do, then they're going to get killed. We don't want to have to worry about that. We want to just be free and we want to be able to worship God. God, help us. We learn here in this story that even though it was really difficult, God still had a plan. And we see in Exodus chapter 2, it starts out a man from the house of Levi. Levi was one of Jacob's sons. There were the 12 sons. One of them was Levi. And one of Levi's grandkids had a wife who was also from the tribe of Levi, the group of Levi. And it says, the woman conceived and bore a son. She gave birth to a baby boy. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Because if they would have found out that she had a son, it would have been bad. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. And she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done with him. So imagine if you're this woman and you have just had a baby and you're so excited because you had a baby and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, but it's a boy. And the boys are supposed to die. But she didn't want to kill him. She didn't want to follow the commands and kill him. So she prayed and she said, God, please take care of my boy. She trusted the God enough to put him she wove him a special basket, and she put him in the basket and then put the basket in the water so that he wouldn't drown. And then she hoped and prayed that something bigger would come, that God would deliver her son somehow. And she sent her daughter after it. And in verse 4 it says, his sister, the baby's sister, stood to know what would be done with him. And it says in verse 5, the daughter of Pharaoh, the princess, came down to bathe at the river. And while her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent a servant woman, and she took it. When she opened the basket, what did she find? She saw a child. Imagine, there's just something floating down the river. You pick it up, and there's a baby. Hold on. I'm up. Just out, taking a bath, and then suddenly, there's a baby. Okay, now listen, this isn't an actual baby. Don't worry. It's a panda. But we're going to pretend it's a baby. So she's sitting there, and she's holding this baby, just like I'm holding this baby. And she looked at it, and she said, oh, it's so cute. I know it's a Hebrew baby. Like, I can tell that it's not Egyptian. But it's so cute. Maybe I can keep it, and maybe it doesn't have to die. Like, I know my dad said that all the baby boys are supposed to die, but I'm the princess, and I can do what I want. And if I want to keep this baby, then I'm going to keep this baby. And it said that when she held it, she realized that she wanted to keep it, but she didn't have any way to take care of a baby. Like, she wasn't a mom. She didn't know how to take care of it. She didn't know how to raise it or how to feed it. So the baby's sister, who was watching, stepped out and said, princess, I know a Hebrew woman, an Israelite woman, who can take care of the baby while it's a baby, and then when it's older, you can have it. And the princess said, that's a great idea. And she held it and she said, I'm going to name it Moses, because Moses means I drew it up out of the water. And then she gave the baby back to his sister, and then the sister took it back to the mom, and the mom was able to take care of her baby again. So God saved it. The baby was supposed to die. He was supposed to be thrown into the Nile. The Pharaoh was going to kill it. But because the mother trusted God, they were able to deliver the baby. And the princess found it, and now this baby, now named Moses, could be a Hebrew with special authority, because not only was he a Hebrew, but he got to go and live in the palace with the princess. We see that God was still watching, and God had a plan. The people thought that everything was hopeless, but our bottom line for this week, listen closely, our bottom line is God watches over us and can direct our paths. Last month, we talked about our memory verse, and it said, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. In the same way, God saw baby Moses and said, because your mother trusted, because you're one of my people, I will direct your paths. And God directed the basket to land in the Pharaoh's daughter's arms. So no matter what we're going through, we can trust God to direct our paths. I'm going to put this baby down, this baby panda. I'm going to set him back down like he's back in the water. And we're going to talk a little bit about our new memory verse. Before we had trust in the Lord and he will direct your paths, like I just said. But this month, not just this month, it'll be over the course of several weeks. We'll keep touching back on different verses. We won't have one main verse. We're going to focus on some different verses to talk about different things that we learn about God from the story of Moses. Because Moses' story is one of the most famous stories in the whole Bible. Because through Moses' story, we're able to learn so much about who God is and how he relates to his people. And one of the things that we learn is that God is omniscient. It's a big word, omniscient. Can you say that? Omniscient. It starts with omni or omni, which means all. And then the omniscient, the second part, means seeing. So he's all seeing. He's able to see everything. When the mother found out she was pregnant, God could see her. When the baby was born and it was a boy, God could see that. When the baby boy was put in the water, in the woven basket, God could see that. When baby Moses was drawn out of the water, God could see that. In everything, God can see that. And all throughout the Bible, God could see all of it. And while he's watching, he can watch and direct our paths in a way that he knows best. And that all-seeing is omniscient. And so one of the verses that I think of when I think of omniscient is Romans chapter 11, verse 33. It says, "Oh, the depths and the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgment and how inscrutable his ways." Which inscrutable means that you can't even imagine it. There's so much happening. There's so much that he can see. There's so much that he knows. There's so much that he's in control over. We can't even begin to wrap our brains around it. The depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge. He's rich and he's wise and he's full of knowledge. He's seeing all these things and he's able to direct our paths. How unsearchable are his judgment, how inscrutable his ways. That's Romans 11:33. So as we follow the story of Moses these next few weeks, we're going to see different times that God is omniscient. And we'll keep looking back at this verse in Romans. As we focus on this part of the story of Moses, we look a lot towards his mother and how his mother trusted in the Lord enough to put her baby in a basket and float him down the river. And this is an amazing story about how God directed his path, how God could see them. And you might want to ask your parents, but there are a lot of stories that still happen today that people trust in God and he directs their paths in a way that they can tell that he is seeing them and he is helping them and he is guiding them in the way that he would want them to go. And it might be really confusing at the time. Like, I'm sure Moses' mom didn't know what was going to end up happening to her baby, but she trusted. And there are people today that still trust in the Lord, and he brings them through hard times or through confusing situations and delivers them into a wonderful new scenario. As we learn about ways to trust God, I'm going to show you a way that you can make some hands-on activities, but also start thinking about some of the ways that you can trust God or how God has directed your paths so far. So, first step is you're going to fold a piece of paper in half, hot dog style. We're going to weave and make a basket, just like Moses' mother wove a basket together for Moses to go down the river and end up in the Pharaoh's house. So you'll fold both pages in half. I used brown and green because those are what reminded me the most of like the weeds or the bulrushes that it said she would have used. and then I'm going to weave some of those together. And I'll start out by making almost like a boat shape with this paper. And I'm just gonna cut it. I'll hold it this way. We don't have a second camera today, so you'll just have to see it this way. Cut it in this way so it's kind of like a boat. Like that. There's the little boat floating down the river. Woo, but it's not woven yet. So you'll take the fold and you'll cut it so that the flappy end is facing up, and you'll cut almost all the way to the edge. Not all the way to the edge, just right there. Almost done. Okay, so that will be what you weave through. That right there. You see it? That's what you'll weave your green paper through. So then your green paper, I remember now, you're gonna cut another one of those little loops, those little half circle things. Another one, and then you're gonna cut it, but this time you're going to cut it all the way through, right? Hold on. Okay, cool, got it, had to think about it. Don't know why I forgot what I was doing. You're going to use it, you're gonna cut it this way with the flappy part facing out. So you're going to have strips that are like this. And then on those strips, you're going to write some things that you can trust God in, or ways that God has carried you through. So I'm going to write that God brought me to HFC. So God takes me to HFC. That's one thing God did. He took me to HFC. And I'll write some of those on all these different strips. And then you'll go over under between these little slips. And so you'll start out over, under, like this, all the way through, alternating to weave these pieces through. And you're not going to be able to read it super well anymore, but now it goes through. And you'll keep doing that until the whole thing is covered. And you'll have to use the smaller strips on the top, and then you'll use the bigger strips in the middle, like that, until you have all these different ways that God brought you through some hard times, just like God led her to put the basket together. So I'm gonna do that, and you're gonna see it in super fast forward motion, and then we're gonna put it all together at the end. So boom, it's done. I did my little over under, and if you want, you can start to like fold up the edges a little bit. If you want, you can glue down these little pieces that stick out on the outside so it's a little more together, like this is already kind of falling out. If you wanna do that, you can fold that up. If you wanna just leave it the way it is, your little woven creation, just like Moses' mother wove the basket together. And you can try and make it into like a little boat or like a little basket like Moses would have been in as he floated down the river. So I hope you had fun with that. I hope you have fun making your little marshmallow pyramids. Send me pictures. I want to see what your baskets look like. I want to see what your pyramids look like, or whatever other kind of structure you want to make with those marshmallows and spaghetti noodles. And we will continue to learn about the story of Moses. Next week we'll continue what happens as he's been raised in the palace as an Israelite boy. And we'll see how God is still watching over, omniscient over his ways then. So see you next week. Look at this. Look at it. I thought it was gonna fall apart, but it didn't. I wonder if I could take it home.